India's dominance in the market of rice, a staple for many in north of India, perhaps even south of India, overall throughout the country for that matter, India exports, and the total exports in the world, India accounts for 60% of that share when it comes to rice. But given that the monsoon has wreaked havoc across north of India, Government of India is now taking measures to to ensure at least momentarily that exports are not to the tune of what they were about a month ago, so that the needs of Indians is catered to first before farmers start exporting them outside. What are the details we have, Kartik?
So exactly, Shweta. I think the move to ban the export of white non-basmati rice outside the shores of India has been taken by the Government of India in line with the exports of grains and cereal that we had seen even earlier. And this trend started in the wake of COVID, followed by the Russia-Ukraine war, where essential item exports outside of India were banned. And this was banned primarily to cater to domestic demand, number one, and then inflationary pressure on cereal. So remember, your core inflation, which does not account for for fuel and agri products, food and fuel, basically the core inflation not accounting for those, has been under control. Whereas your headline inflation, when you take fuel and food into account, has not been able to we haven't been able to hem it in. So I think it's important for India right now, in its own domestic interest, in its own electoral interest, to try and tame down inflation and try and ensure that there is some sort of a price stability when it comes to essentials like rice, like grain, like cereal, like wheat. And these exports, sporadically, we keep changing the threshold for export, we keep changing the percentages of export, and right now a complete ban is particularly to hem in this inflation that we are seeing in food. Now, you're right, 60% of the world's rice basket.
Actually, it's 40. I stand corrected. India accounts for 40% of the global rice exports.
Okay, so yeah, so I think 40%. So I mean, we are a dominant player when it comes to the overall. But even I remember reading the number 60. I think we'll tally that and we'll mention this in our notes. But whatever, I think even if you were to average it out, you're talking about half of the world's rice basket actually comes from India. And the rest of it actually also comes from the subcontinent. So you've got Nepal, you've got Bangladesh, you've got China, and to go a little on the eastern side on the same equator line, you've got Iran. And then you've got, some pockets of Africa contributing to overall rice production and rice export. Now, what this means for India, we've discussed that, we will be able to hopefully hem in food inflation. What this means for the rest of the world is increased disruption in global supply chains of food items. It means greater inflationary risk for the rest of the world when it comes to headline inflation, which includes food as a key component. And therein some impact which could indirectly accrue back to India. But I think right now priority number one for the government is to bring down inflation, and we've seen that monetary policy has been tightened as far as possible. Now it's time to work on some fiscal measures, and this becomes one of the fiscal measures that the government is taking to ensure that the import-export deficit, also on account of again our dependence on imported fuel, imported crude, has gone up about 82% or so. So overall, to balance this deficit in terms of current account as well as the fiscal deficit, we are dependent on on fuel to be imported. And while rice would have added the export revenue in dollar terms, right now I think the government is playing it safe by ensuring that there is inflation within India under check right now before we open up the taps for rice export to the world.
And as you rightly pointed out, we are a dominant player in the export business. Concerns, of course, being raised across the board that rice prices, which are already a decade high, could be further hiked after this announcement and after this measure, which would invariably hurt not just India in the long run, but in the short run, it's going to hurt people all across the world because they are heavily dependent on Indian rice.
You're right, Shweta. And look at, let's say, so I don't want to comment only on rice. If I were to look at the entire, grains food basket, which includes rice, which includes pulses, which includes wheat, you've seen double-digit inflation. So, and that's what I'm talking about, headline inflation, not core inflation. So, taking these food items, which are extremely volatile, food and fuel being extremely volatile, price-sensitive entities. If you look at grains as a whole, you've seen a double-digit inflation coming, squarely around 11.5, 12% on an average. Since October last year, in fact, we've been seeing double-digit inflation month on month on food. And that, of course, has to be brought down at least to single digits. So while it will not make, food items any cheaper, while this export ban is not going to reduce prices immediately, at least it's going to be able to contain at what rate they get hiked. So if it's in line with headline inflation, if it is in line with core inflation, if it is in line with or a little better than the overall inflationary pressure, it is better for Indian consumers and it is a lesser sort of outgo on the monthly food bill. And then obviously we have got a large section of middle class and below poverty line population, which is dependent on these prices to be contained. But yeah, you're right. Overall, global supply chains on food are going to get disrupted, and India being a dominant player there, I think there is going to be pressure for India to end this ban soon. But I think India will want to sustain it until we are sure that our prices have come down.
All right, and prices coming down in India would also invariably mean prices will go up across the world, as India exports 40% of the world's rice needs. We will of course track the developments as far as the ban on non-basmati rice is concerned and its aftermath.